Hey guys, so I'm wanting to record something pretty important to me, and I'm going to do my best to not have to pause and break a lot. So yeah, let's get started. Okay, I'm going to do my very best during this video to not be all over the place. I'm going to do my best. I'm not really sure how that's going to go. So yesterday, first let's start off by saying this entire video is not at all about politics, about swaying a person one way or the other. I think both sides of our government and our leadership has a lot of issues. Okay, let me just start right there. So if you have a political comment to this video, I'll likely delete it because that's not what it's about. It's about the human side, it's about the problem, it's about trauma, it's about pain, it's about healing for both men and women that have been victims of abuses across the board. So so yesterday I watched the Kavanaugh hearings and I felt like, and I watched them all day. I felt like I was really struggling to, what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't about watching her story because I've dealt with a lot of my own trauma, a lot of it. And so I feel very disconnected at this point to mine. But I'm drawn to it because there's such a systemic issue still. And that's why I felt like yesterday I almost wanted to start doing a recording and I didn't. But I woke up this morning feeling like it's something that was really, really heavy on my heart that I needed to do. We have such a systemic issue. Our culture, and this isn't just America, this is a problem around the world, but our culture has a lot of issues. And I tend to set a lot of people off. I know when I've talked about it before, when I talk about the system or patriarchy or whatever, people get really like, whoa, 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 slow down. You're threatening my existence. It's like, no, I really am talking about humanity at large. I personally would put myself in the bucket as an egalitarian. I think we're both equal. We both everybody should have equal rights. It shouldn't be down to gender and preferences and any of that. This is about humanity at a core level. But I'm getting off topic. My point is, I really felt the need to share two things. I think you need to understand why it's so important and why we're talking about it and why people are just done. And I think it's important to know how to share your story. Sharing your story, let's just start there. Sharing your story does not require you to share your details. Brene Brown talks about this an awful lot when she's talking about vulnerability and shame. And we should be sharing stories, but the details only go to those that we have a deep established trust with. But what you can do is share your story transparently and be authentic in it by sharing the emotions. So you can say that I had X situation happen. This is how it made me feel. This is the result after that. This is what I've been dealing with. And to do that, we allow other humans to connect with us on the emotional level because they may not have ever experienced what you experienced, but more than likely they understand the emotion behind it. So they can connect that in their own brain to an experience that they've had, and therefore you're opening the gate for empathy to connect. And yes, I realize there are a lot of people out there who don't even understand what empathy is, let alone care about kindness and compassion. This isn't about railing about that. I think the other thing I want to preface going into my story here is you cannot control other people's reactions, nor is it any of your business right now. This is really about focusing on how we just share what's going on. So we can keep pointing fingers and we can keep pulling back down and saying things, but if we can't own our own stories, if we can't take ownership for sharing, if we can't take ownership for allowing ourselves to be able to deal with it and to filter it and to get help and to seek help and ask for help is a big one. That's really what the whole focus is. But I wanted to point out that the reason this is so important, the reason that so many people do not come forward, is we have a culture that has not believed us, that has told us we're exaggerating, that has made excuses for those that have been accused. And so the victims often have to deal with that. We're told that victims are responsible, at least women are responsible for providing all of the proof. Okay. So these are a couple of things I wanted to touch on with my own story. But we also don't share because we live in a culture that has associated a lot of guilt and shame anytime something happens, even if it's not it's not your fault, but we're going to shame you for it. And those of us also not only have had to deal with these situations and are dealing with traumas, we often don't talk about them as well, just simply for the emotional issues, but we don't talk about them publicly because of our families, because of the people that we care about, and knowing that they may not have the threshold or the capacity to manage our traumas with us. And that's not, by the way, that's not saying something negative about your family. Just realize that this is something I was going to share a little bit later in the story, but I've had this own situation where I have two parents who are just amazing and highly supportive of me. They don't understand me, but we've all come to an agreement. Nobody understands me. That's okay. But man, do they love and they support and include me in everything. But I also know that they have a threshold to how much they can take about pain related to me. Okay. And so related to either of their kids. But there was a point where I started sharing part of my story with my dad and providing details. And I saw him shut down. And I know as well, because the immediate right after that is, I need you to stop. And I need you to not share these things with your mother, because she wouldn't be able to take it. And so out of, and I've never said that out loud. So, sorry, Mom. But it's really like this, you begin to protect the people around you. I didn't say anything to my own sons until, I guess it's just been within the last year. I had a son who called me about a school project he was working on, and writing a paper about women in his women's studies class and women in the workplace and how hard it is to get into leadership roles, and some stuff about sexual harassment and things of that nature. It was just kind of a broad topic. And I began to share my experiences about how hard it was moving into management and leadership roles because of other women, but as well about the issues that I face being a woman. And I started sharing, I gave him a couple of instances, and he was just floored. He didn't even know what to say, because like, are you kidding? Like, that's still a thing? And I said, yeah, in fact, it's been a year, or actually at that point it had been less than a year since the last incident. So I say all these things to say that we tend not to share. So don't make an assumption that somebody near you doesn't have a story to share. They're holding it for a reason. Either their traumas and pains are still holding them back. They haven't been able to process it fully. And there's a lot of reasons why. So I don't want to say that somebody's not broken still because of something. Sometimes it's just, we all have a different avenue to our healing. Our journeys are very, very different. How we go about healing is very different. So it doesn't make one person better than the other, or wrong or different or anything like that. It took me a very long time to get to the place I could even deal with mine. And then when I did it in a very different way than a lot of other people. So the fact that I'm in a place that I'm in after 8 years of solid work on it is massive. But it's, I'm at a point I'm very emotionally disconnected and have processed a lot of that, and have had the ability to forgive and move forward. It doesn't mean things still don't happen to me, or sometimes I don't kind of get triggered, but it just doesn't make me better than anybody else. It's just where I'm at in this point in my journey. But I wanted to I wanted to talk about the things. There's a lot of things where people feel like, well, and I'm going to speak to women right now because my experience, okay, it's the experience I'm living in this on this world, and I would just want to say I realize this happens for men too, but we do have to understand the numbers are far greater for women, and right now it is very important that we're discussing this issue this way. But I just want to be clear, it happens to both males and females. This is not a this is just not a gender thing. It's across the board. It's pervasive. My earliest memory, and I've never shared this with anybody ever, my earliest memory of the first inappropriate behavior / assault that happened to me, I was about 5 or 6 years old. And it was a couple of boys from church. And the reason I'm bringing this up even now is, why is it important? Because we have a mindset in our culture that's pushed that girls are dressing inappropriately, girls are doing things to invite situation, girls, always the problem with the woman. And we let boys off for bad behavior. That's been I'm overgeneralizing here, but that's been the general message that continues to be sent. So a reason I'm raising a couple of church situations, again, is not to point the finger at people in church because they're supposed to be better. This is just the saying that it happens in all sorts of places. It's just not teens at a party. It's not meeting somebody at a bar. It's not just wearing a pair of shorts that are too short. It's not that. I just want to be clear. It's why I'm choosing to share this. But yeah, that was my earliest memory. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we had gone to someone's house after church and for dinner, and I was playing with the kids in the basement and had a situation occur. So that is definitely, the details are burned in my memory because that was the first significant sort of event. And throughout school, it was really more about, especially as I moved into puberty and I began to develop early, it became an issue anywhere I went, being looked at by men, grown-ass men, okay? Being grabbed by men as I was walking by. It would happen at places like going to Hershey Park with teens on a youth group trip, and just being in the queue and walking through a queue and having somebody walk by and grab my butt or my breasts or whatever, say inappropriate things. These are the things women and young girls deal with. And I think in some situations it's definitely improving as our culture is shifting, but it's a reason why we need to talk about the fact that it's so pervasive. It's been happening for so long, and I don't think people understand, if you've never experienced it, or if you're a man and you've never experienced the other side of this situation, is how much it happens. And I think for me, because it was such a big part of our culture when I was growing up, I mean, just that it was what it was and nobody talked about it, put more shame back on me and misunderstanding about how I felt about myself and my own body, or what my relationship was to men. And so it continued to, even though that's not what I was being fed at home, it's what was being fed to me externally and supported by everybody, all these different people's behaviors. And so what it did then was create a misperception in my head about women's relationships to men, and what we were good for, what we weren't good for, and just all of the things that run through a young girl's head, especially at a time when your development is so crucial in your belief system and how you feel about yourself. So your self-esteem, all of that stuff was being affected. It would happen in school sometimes, but more in school, it was just boys saying inappropriate things versus being inappropriate with their hands, being grabbed on occasion. And again, I act like that's no big deal. But again, that's my point to the way our culture is just said, oh, it's just a thing. It just happens. So you just kind of gotta deal with it. For me, the majority of my traumas happened, and my situations happened as an adult. After being married, and I got divorced, I was 27, 28. So a lot of mine occurred from that age of 28 on. And and I was experiencing things as a 19, 20 when I first started working. I was working in a physician's office in Syracuse, New York, and I had a one of the doctors who was just constantly inappropriate, constantly. And I felt like, well, I have to earn a paycheck. I have to be here. I can't, or what am I going to say? Nobody's going to believe me, or they're just going to say, well, he was, doing this, that, or whatever. Excuses are always being made, which is why I'm saying people don't step up with their stories. But to be at work every day meant that I would have to be confronted whenever he was in the office of him standing in a doorway or against a wall and intentionally moving himself whenever I moved past him to press himself into me. So there are things that are as simple as that to things that are far more aggressive. For me personally, going out on a date was a risk. 80+% of the dates I went out on resulted in highly inappropriate behavior, to where I was extremely fearful, and in situations that I should never have been put in. And this is when people go, well, you shouldn't have been on a date with somebody you met online or whatever. Well, you know what? It's what you don't understand is how pervasive this is. Prime example, right after I got divorced from my first husband, I was pushed out of church by the people who said I was not being a good enough wife. I was not being holy enough. I was not being whatever. And that was used to excuse his infidelity and inappropriateness, which they were all involved in, or knew about from that standpoint. So right before I was basically pushed out and really asked not to be part of my church community, because I was a divorced woman, which was hard enough in and of itself. But right at that time, I had connected with somebody who I was friendly with because we had a shared common background. We were both preachers' kids. We grew up in the same environment. We had kind of had a shared commonality. And I'd smiled at him. I smiled and said, hey, how are you? To which 3 days later, he showed up unannounced at my apartment to talk about that smile and what that meant to him. And I had apparently, according to him, opened the door for us to have a relationship because I just smiled at him. Now, this didn't result in an assault or anything like that. Fortunately, that's not where this went. But I'm using these as examples for people to understand how deep this problem is in our country and in the world, and just amongst bad relationships, and why people don't talk about things that happen to them. And this was a married person with several children who assumed that my smile and my kindness was an open invitation to have an affair. So when you have these kinds of things happen and you have a married man from church show up at your door to be nice and talk to you to see how you're doing post-divorce, you find yourself sitting in your living room with 2 kids sleeping in the back and going, holy shit, how am I going to get out of this? What happens next? What do I say? What do I do to make sure I'm okay? How do I make sure my children are okay? So these are the things we have to deal with. That wasn't the only situation from that church, by the way. I had another married man in the middle of a community session one night approach me with essentially an additional offer. Now that I'm married and you're divorced, I know how those kind of women are. So these are the things we deal with. These are the things we've had to face and confront. I managed at a Fortune 100 company, and I called a senior manager at that time, so step below a partner. I called him out for inappropriate behavior. And he was being extremely rude to me and lewd, and had several other things that occurred with that situation, just shy of putting his hands on me. And I asked the managing partner for assistance, and I wasn't given any proper anything other than, we'll sit at a table and you can tell him how you feel, and I'll just be there to mediate in case things get bad. And so I had to spend an hour defending myself to someone who was making me uncomfortable and was being inappropriate. And that was his quote unquote slap on the hand. There was no follow-up. There was no anybody managing the situation. And I had to continue working for him, with him and for him going forward. So these are the things we deal with if we want to have jobs and put food on our table. Let's pick two other situations while we're on work, and then I'll move to one other topic related to this, and then I'll try to wind it down. But these are the things I was feeling were important to put out there and share, to understand how this happens and places it happens, because there are misperceptions and misconceptions about how inappropriate behavior, sexual violence, and the like happen. And so that was my only purpose here that I was feeling called to do this morning. My two most recent work situations. So those of you who know that for the last 8 years, I've been doing my own thing. I freelance, I've started a company. Can you wonder why I like working by myself? And so I had been freelancing out in a management consulting group for several years. So I'd known this person for 4 years. And we were sitting at a conference table with one other teammate of mine who's a male, and the owner of the company, who's often made inappropriate comments. But I had put a pair of reading glasses on because stare at a computer all day, your eyes, and the older you get, your eyes start to fade. So I put a pair of reading glasses on, which apparently was his thing. And he began to make comments about them, in that if I wore them when we were in the boardroom with the executive leaders, we could get a lot more work, and they would actually pay more attention to me and think I'm smarter than I really am. So there's a whole lot of things wrong with that. There's a whole lot of things wrong with all of that. And my reply at the time, because as I've dealt with my traumas and I've come out of a lot of things, it's easier for me to stand in my own truth and to stand for myself, stand up for myself for who I am, and what's right and be able to defend myself in those situations in a different way. So, my comment back was, well, I would really hope that they hire us because I have a brain in my head, not because I'm wearing a pair of glasses and a certain skirt. To which I actually fueled a few additional comments. And it got to the point, it was so awkward and uncomfortable, that my male teammate spoke up and said, you need to stop talking right now because you're this close to a lawsuit, which was true. So it's bad if the fella in the room is also equally uncomfortable. And then probably about 3 or 4 months after that situation, so this has all been in under 2 years, I had actually met someone through a local chamber of commerce and was very interested in what they were doing in sales, and he was looking for some additional freelance sales work, so he told me. And I was just getting the company started, and he's busy doing sales calls all day. This was going to be like freelance off the side. And I said, well, yeah, why don't we just meet up at 5 o'clock when you're done, and we'll meet over here at this place. We'll just grab a beer and we'll have a conversation about sales and what that could look like. Very benign. By the way, this wasn't a bar. It's like a restaurant with a bar. So we weren't 15 minutes into the conversation before it all shifted into a highly sexually charged conversation, to which, no matter how many times I pumped the brakes and said, you're totally wrong, that's not what we're here to do, and whatever. Long story short, by the time I got everything shut down and we got outside, he grabbed me and attacked me in the parking lot. So these things happen all the time. Just because women show up in places and breathe So there needs to be an understanding at how deep this runs. And I know it's uncomfortable. If you've gone through your own traumas, you're uncomfortable right now, and you may have even already clicked off and not be listening to me because it's triggering things in you. You may be somebody that just says, ooh, here we go again. One more woman griping about things, and now I'll never be able to talk to another woman. No, because if that's your response, if that's your automatic response, you need to ask yourself one of two things. Ask yourself two questions. Am I responding this way because I really don't understand what they're talking about? Like, I've never had that experience, so maybe I need to go talk to other people and understand why people feel this way, why women feel this way, and why men feel this way. Or the other response is, why am I feeling this way? And I have some things that I need to change in my behavior to become more aware of the way my behavior is? Because honestly, most people fall in that category. The people that are more benign, that are still misbehaving, but are just a little bit more benign in their actions, things that they're saying, like jokes. I'm just joking. No, you're not. You need to sit down and understand why you're saying what you're saying. But again, it has to be talked about to understand that this happens in all types of environments, at all different ages and all different situations, for all sorts of different reasons. And that's the point with the Me Too movement, is people, women and men, are standing up and saying, this has got to stop. We're harming each other. We're destroying each other. We're breaking people apart. And I might have done something because I'm a broken person, and so I need to address that. But now we have other broken people that need to be loved and healed and know that they're valuable and they're worthy, and they do not need to carry guilt and shame with them because of situations, that they do have a place that they can be loved in, that a place of belonging, that they can find safe places, that they can have environments to talk to about this. And it might take, I want to encourage you, it might take time to find places of trust and places to heal. It's going to look different for each person where you find that healing at. I need to also feel like I need to say, it's not just going to church or a church community. There are other facets. It's not just going to an AA. It's not just going here and there, all those types of things. It's going to look different for every person. The reason I say that is I had a church community that kicked me out. I had 2 babies, struggling to put food on the table, and they just shut me out completely. I had another group, and this was my most traumatic, and I don't talk about it at all. I mention things that happen, and I'll say what happened, but I don't even talk about it with friends. But my most traumatic abuse happened in my second marriage: verbal, mental, emotional, physical, and sexual. And I do not talk about it. People know a little bit about the physical abuse. They know a lot about the verbal abuse, the mental abuse, but I never talk about the sexual abuse with anybody. I never have. I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it with friends. And it was so bad every single day for 4 years that I don't even mention his name. Like, just no longer rates on that scale. So even in marriages, things like this can happen. And the people that do these things, well, before I get into that, I wanted to just tie up my last comment. The places that you can go, we actually went, well, my first marriage was really bad too. And I went to counseling, and they kept telling me it was my fault because I was a preacher's kid. Everything was happening in marriage was my fault because I must have grown up in a repressed environment, which is so not true. But then when we went back to counseling again, it was continuing to be put on me that something was wrong with me that would cause my husband to react the way that he was acting. And the second one, there was a lot going on, from drugs to, I believe, an undiagnosed mental illness to just mental health challenges in general were really bad. And I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just saying it amped up situations all the time. When you would least expect it, it would turn on a dime. But we had gone to the church we were at and really actually enjoyed the church and the community. So we went part of a recovery program that they were offering. So recovery program is a traditional 12-step like you would think with AA. This one was based a more biblically based one, and part of that community. And we actually separated. Men would go to one group, women would go to the other group. I actually got the courage to talk to the 20 women in that group at recovery. After a few weeks, we built up a little measure of trust. I felt like I can open up and ask for help. And I opened up and I asked for help. And I was immediately shut down again, that this is my fault. That if you're going to be a quote unquote Christian and go to quote unquote church and going to be quote unquote, I use a lot of quotes because different story, different day. That to be a quote unquote Proverbs 31 woman, which is something I heard growing up all my life, to be okay with God, I must stay. I had to stay. That's what they told me in recovery group. It was my responsibility as a woman to stay in an abusive relationship. So I say that again, is that these are things that a lot of people are told at the risk for themselves. So I initially stayed in that marriage because I felt guilty that I had made the decision to marry him when everybody else saw the red flags and I chose to ignore them. I felt ashamed because of the decisions I had made to be with him, and ashamed of the treatment and the behavior. I was shamed daily for putting on a nice outfit and doing my hair and makeup to go to work, because I worked again in a Fortune 100 and I managed people and I had to look a certain way to be part of that job. So being in a business suit and curling my hair and putting on makeup every day yielded an onslaught of abuse. And so you begin to, people that are in abusive relationships, no matter what the abuse is, you can have an abusive boss, you can have an abusive coworker. It doesn't mean that person ever lays a finger on you. It's verbal, it's mental, it's emotional strain and stresses, and not treating each other with love and compassion and kindness can lead to a myriad of abuses. But I was continuing at every turn where I would seek help, being told that sexual abuse was my fault. There was something I wasn't doing in my marriage relationship. Or I wasn't being a certain way, or I wasn't doing enough, and therefore it was okay. And you begin to carry an awful lot of shame about that you just allow it to happen more and more and more. For people that say, well, you should have left, or you should have done this, that you say this to people, because people said it to me, and I will say, I had those thoughts too, until I woke up one day in this relationship and thought, how in God's name did I actually get here? Like, how did this happen? How did I slowly get moved? And after the day happened where I nearly lost my life, and it took me 26 hours before I went to the police. And because I was in so much pain physically, I was a hot mess. I couldn't control the shaking. I was sitting in the corner of a room. There were so many feelings like I just couldn't get up and go do it. And finally, because I had a friend that was braver than myself at that moment, got me there. And I was 2 hours too late, because I was told within 24 hours we could have done something, but no. So we can fill out a report, but it's up to, the AD to figure out if they ever want to press charges or not. So the very next day, I went to the courthouse to seek a protection order, because I figured maybe I could do that. And the first thing I was handed was a pamphlet on what abuse actually is. And I was surprised and shocked, because I was textbook. Everything in the classic abuse scenario, it floored me, because nobody ever talked to me about what abuse looked like. No. Nobody talked to me about any of this. We don't teach and talk about appropriate relationships and behaviors. And so I was floored that I was classic textbook, everything. But what was really sad and scary, and this is important to the story, so stick with me, I know I've been going on, but what's really important about this next is when I went to get the protection order, the judge said no, because the judge asked me, is this the first time it happened? And I said yes, because I was confused as to what actually constituted as violence. This was the first time I had physical marks and bruising, and that it was severe enough in my mind, close enough to me having potentially have lost my life, and this person had snapped completely. It was the first time I could actually quantify in my own mind. I didn't count the times prior when I'd been choked out completely because there were no markings. So in my mind, somebody's in an abusive relationship, we can't process. The trauma is so bad. The violence, the lack of safety, the lack of being able to anchor to anything safe. You can't use your senses. Our only thing is every day living in a fight or flight is, in this case where I lived with the person, I was married to the person, that, you're just trying to make it through the day. So some of these things don't click in our minds as abuse. So I said, yes, it's the first time that had happened, but I discounted the several times prior when I'd been choked out, or I didn't constitute all the other abuses because they'll tell you that stuff just happens, come back with something more severe and we'll see. So he said, no. He said, no, this is first time. I'm not giving you a protection order at all. So we don't just do things like that. So I left and I sat down with the sheriff, who had this look in his eyes because he knows. He'd probably been called to so many, and he just knows. And he just gave me the saddest look and said, I am so sorry. Because typically what happens next is we find women dead at the hands of their significant others. Be safe. And I left. And since then, I've learned a lot, educated myself, and it took me a solid decade to work through guilt and through shame that I have felt at the hands of other people. But yet I have put it on myself, and other people have put it on me that I'm the problem, and that I should feel shame, and that I should feel guilt for what happened, that it was somehow my fault. And this is what victims feel. This is why victims don't come forward, because there is hardly ever very little recourse. And we hurt our families in the process. We destroy aspects of our lives in the process by being brave enough. So no matter where you sit on what happened yesterday with Kavanaugh hearings and what your political beliefs are and what your viewpoints are on it, and the circus that ensues constantly in a day-to-day in the political world, put that aside and just look at the humanity. Look at the bravery it took this woman to come forward and share her story. I'm not asking you to weigh in on what you think. I'm just saying, just look at the courage it takes to step forward and say, I've had this happen to me. So if you have people that you know that are starting to share their stories, just listen. It's not for you to judge right or wrong. It's not for you to assess whether that person should or shouldn't have been in the place they were in. It's just about loving people. It's about embracing them. It's about empathy and compassion and kindness. It's about extending divine love to people and just saying, it's okay, I got you. Keep giving people, creating safe places of trust for people to fall into and to know that they can share their stories. Don't ever ask people for details. Don't get in their business. It's not your business. It's not your business, the exact details, unless that person is, you're in the middle of, if you're an investigator and it's up to you to prove something, you can ask questions. Other than that, it is not your business, the details that have happened in somebody's life. But just hold them. Know that probably nearly everybody in your sphere of influence and circle has endured situations, both men and women that you know have gone through things they have never shared. I've never said any of this out loud except for to a couple of people. My parents don't know maybe 3% of anything that's ever occurred in my life. I don't share it with anybody. I don't talk to it with friends because I have previously felt ashamed about everything that happened. The times that my life were threatened, the times that I didn't think I was going to safely get out of the situation with my life intact. I've never shared those situations with anybody, even the people that are the closest to me, for different reasons. One, I don't want to relive it. And two, I carried the shame and the guilt that it was my fault for being alive and present and breathing in that room with that person. And so at this point now, I don't get into it because I have dealt with each of those situations and have forgiven the people involved and released it. And I live my life for myself now. And now that I've learned how to process guilt and shame and release it, I just don't go back to it. There's no sense in reviving the dead horse at this point for me. There are a lot of people that still need to heal. And in order to heal, you have to talk through it. You have to assess it. You need a place of trust to get all of it out. And it's going to take you years upon years. But there is a way through, and there is a way to heal. There are safe places out there that can help you get through it. So find the right type of place to be for you. Find your ways to get it out and do it. And there are a lot of therapies out there. So I think it requires several different modalities to help you heal. Look into the different ones. Find your trusted communities of faith. Find your trusted communities of love. Find your trusted communities for healing. And stay true to that, but know that you're not the problem. You're not, your brokenness that you have felt by the hands of another is nothing for you to be ashamed of or feel guilty about. So find your places. So I'm going to wrap this up, my morning monologue and ramble, which is probably God knows how long at this point, but it was just important for me to say this off the cuff. And now I guess I feel like I can get on with my day now. Like it was just, I felt burdened today to just say, aside from Me Too, that we need to understand that systemically this happens in all sorts of places, to all sorts of people, at all sorts of ages, at the hands of all sorts of people. It's just not sick weirdos that give you candy from the van. Okay, like the joking things that a lot of us were taught growing up, don't take candy from strangers, stay away from the creepy guy in the van. It's beyond that. It happens in our places of worship. It happens in our schools. It happens in our homes. It happens with people we know. It happens with people that we love and people that we had trust in at one point. And I would say too, if you are a parent of a child who has gone through something, no matter, I don't care if your child's 50 years old, you also need to release guilt and shame. If you were unaware of a situation, or if you were aware of a situation, but you haven't processed it right yet, you just don't really know what to do. If you didn't have the tools, that you weren't equipped with the right tools to help them process, it's okay. There are things you can do now to go back and make things right with your child and to love them and to set healthy boundaries. But it's okay. It's never too late to go back and repair relationships. It's never too late for forgiveness. It's never too late to have empathy for something you didn't previously understand, or you were too scared to deal with, or you didn't have the tools. The tools are out there to help you manage and deal with all of these things, from the conversations to the healing to forgiveness, etc. And so don't let that stop you from repairing and restoring relationships in your life, no matter what's happened. And if you're somebody that's on the other end and you're hearing this and you feel like, I hate to admit it, but I was that guy once, or I was even that girl once. I was somebody that hurt another person. There are also ways for you to heal and for you to take ownership in your parts of things. And again, it requires seeking out trusted places for healing and asking yourself the why question. Why would I have done that? Why did I respond that way? Why did I react that way? Why would that have been a thing? I'm not talking about people that are so deeply disturbed, mental health related things and things of that nature. I've had the misfortune of being with two, well, one was really a psychopath, but two sociopathic narcissists. And I can tell you from the behavior and the way people cover and hide, but people that are like that have their own deep, deep, deep wounded places of trauma. And in no way does that excuse harming another person. But it does say that that person equally needs help to become a healthy, whole individual. So I think it's that's just where I'm going to leave it. I won't want to get off on my tangent. So if you know somebody that needs help, help them find help. Help them find a safe place to share their story. Sharing their story does not mean doing it publicly. Granted, I'm 45 years old. Most of my story happened in my adult life, and it took me 10 years to recover from everything that had led up to being 35. So, and there were still things that happened after. So it's not like, it's just been a constant state of growth and healing. And I have been intentional every single day for almost 10 years. Okay, for 8 years, I've been intentional. This first 2 years of the journey, I wasn't so intentional. That involved an awful lot of wine and Netflix binging. So find your places of healing. Know that you're not alone. Know that you have places that you can go. Know that you are not required to share your details, that you can share the emotions and how you felt coming out of situations and how it has you feeling today. But don't be afraid to address it. There are places you can go. There are people that you can be with that can help you work through things. So yeah. Thank you. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience as I kind of rambled through my own pathway of getting out whatever that was appropriate. So thanks, guys.